Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It is Friday, the 22nd of April, 2022. Now, today's guest has influenced, impacted and coached more than 73,500 business people over the past 21 years and is recognised internationally for his business growth formulas. Today, he's going to share with you new insights, ideas and information to build a business rather than being self-employed. Would you please help me welcome our good friend, Dave Guest. Oh my gosh, that impact. I love those numbers. 73,500. I love it.
So you've got,
yeah, it's beautiful. You've run out of fingers on that one. Now you've had a big impact, and three things that my community really are looking for, Dave, is they want to live life on their terms. They want to lead their people to a victory. And a lot of times they don't understand what leadership is. And I say, remember the guy Moses from the Bible? Your job is to part that Red Sea and then take them to the promised land. And once they get to that promised land, they can start to leave that legacy. And that's something that's really important for them. Now, you're the expert in this area, and I think we can learn a lot from you today. Our community members, they don't like working for a boss. They don't like working for a boss, and they want to do business for themselves. But I think there's a lot of confusion here between building a business and being self-employed. Could you help us understand the difference between building a business and being self-employed?
Yeah, absolutely. Don't get self-employed. If you're better off working for someone else, that's the first thing I'll say. I think the confusion is, and especially like we're in Australia, and when you go into business here, you get yourself an Australian business number and ABN. And really, it's just a license to become a tax man and collect money for the government. Being self-employed literally means you're working for yourself. So you sell your time, but you have multiple bosses. And the problem is that source of income can become unreliable. And so people think they're in business when they're self-employed. And the problem with being self-employed is you may not have full-time work. So you're sort of starting and stopping and starting and stopping. If you don't work, you don't get paid. And calling it a business is a bit of a myth. And I think people fall into this dilemma of thinking they're running a business when all they're really being is self-employed. And it sort of creates a problem down the track because there's nothing wrong with being self-employed as long as you know what it is. If you're building a business, that means you're building an entity that generates income whether you're there or not. Now, the first few years of building any business is usually involving self-employment or, rolling up your sleeves and getting to work. But I think, when you talk about the difference, a lot of people fall into this trap of becoming self-employed and getting busy. And they think it's a business, but it's really a busyness, right? And they go to work every day and they go, I run my own business. I'm my own boss. I can work when I want. But if I don't work, I don't get paid. I get that. That's all good, right? But if we are thinking about building business, we're talking about building an entity or a place where people go to work. So they're doing the work of the business and you're building that business. So some people like Michael Gerber wrote a book called The E-Myth Revisited. He talks about working on versus working in. For me, the biggest trap I see is those people that think they're starting their own business, but they go into self-employment. And what happens is they might have been doing this for 20 years and they say, I have had 20 years experience in business. In reality is they've had 1 year photocopied 20 times because they're doing the same thing. And that's where I think people get stuck.
Oh, and it hurts because it's so true. So true. I remember my parents had a pawnbroking business and you'd open the shutter at 9 a.m. You'd shut the shutter at 5 p.m. And you were limited to producing money for that 8 hours. Now, one of the benefits of the business was that we could charge 20% interest per month or part thereof. So you could still possibly get a couple of extra percent of interest over the weekends, but you couldn't make any sales. You couldn't do any more loans once the shutter came down. And after 17 years of being self-employed, the business had no systems, it had no structure, and it actually wasn't saleable. So after 17 years of hard work, you quickly realise that you're self-employed for 17 years. Yes, you might have got a glorified income, but at the end of it, there was nothing that you could walk away with. And I think that happens to a lot of people in their careers as well. Hey, congratulations, thanks for your service. The day you leave, nothing comes in after that.
No,
and
no
that's
assets.
a challenge.
Yeah.
No assets.
So I think...
what,
Sorry, go on.
What's what's the awakening for people? What happens when they realize they're self-employed?
Okay. So I think there's two things you can do. You can be self-employed and be quite successful. But the trick here is to realize that you're not creating an asset. And so the income that you make, you take and you put into some other income producing asset. So buy property or shares or something. So do something with the money. Okay. And that way, when you finish, when you retire or when you stop working, the paycheck stops, but you've now got an asset that's producing income. If that's the way you want to go, that's fine, because I've seen some self-employed people make a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If you're not making a lot of money and you're self-employed and you're just making ends meet, then you're not going to probably reach that sort of end game. And one of the things I often ask people is, I ask them to think, if you're in business, what does your business look like when it's finished? Okay. And the most common response is, what do you mean finished? I just started, right? I have no intention of retiring. And I say to them, imagine I go to a builder and I say, I want you to build me a house. And he goes, yep, no problem. How many floors? Don't worry about that. Just start and I'll tell you as you go, right? Now that sounds crazy, okay? But in business, that's what people do every single day. Just get me a couple of clients and then I'll worry about the next step once I get there. So they've got no plan for an end result. So finished can be one of two or three things. The first one, Daniel, is the one you just mentioned. 80% of businesses will close their door and that's how they finish. They just shut the shutter and they walk away. And that's not by design, that's by default, okay? The other 20% will either be sold or it'll be run under management. And the nice thing about running your own business is you get to choose your own adventure. So you get to pick which one. It doesn't matter which one you choose, but if you don't choose, 80% will go into just shutting down. So if you decide you want to create an asset of it, it's a very different approach to how you build a business than it is to just get busy. Yeah.
Now, when you said choose your own adventure, I don't know if you read that book. When you went to school as well, remember those choose your own adventure books? At the end of the chapter, you get to choose the new direction.
That's right.
And it makes a lot of sense. You know, you can either do it by design or default. But
Yeah.
I say to my clients, if it's by default, it always leads to disaster because you have no control over it whatsoever.
That's right.
So the transition, you know, our audience, they've been working for 20 or 30 years. They've been employed for 20 or 30 years, and then they think sometimes just because they've been employed and they've been able to pull those sticks and lever and be that technician, as they say, I'm good at my job, I must be able to run a business.
Yep.
And then they put their toe in the water. And oftentimes they start to freak out, they start to panic, they start to feel overwhelmed, and they start to feel frustrated.
Yeah.
But a lot of people, because they're afraid of being taken advantage of, they don't have these conversations. They're like, I don't want to tell my friend that my business is not working because they might look down on me.
Yeah.
What are some of these experiences? What's the overwhelm? What's the frustration that they're experiencing that they find it hard to articulate?
You just described my life. I was in corporate for 20 years, and one of the reasons I went into corporate is I tried running my own business, and I failed. And I read a couple of books like the Gerber book, and it said you need to build this business system, and then your business will work for you. And I read the book, and I went to work, and I still ended up working too hard, and I failed. And I was embarrassed about it. So I said, I'm going back to a job. I spent 20 years in corporate, and I was sitting there the whole time, and I was making reasonable money, and I was having what I call fun, but my purpose in my life wasn't there. And I realized going into my own business meant I got to sort of represent myself through the business. And part of the hardest thing about being a business owner is actually acknowledging that you don't know everything and you're probably not going to be successful in your first go. And, you know, one of the best ways to learn, and you know this, Daniel, is you learn to walk by falling over, right? You learn by making mistakes. And if you don't make mistakes, then you didn't learn anything because nothing went wrong. I don't know if you know this, but when a guidance system takes a rocket to the moon, right, the guidance system is only active for when the rocket is off track. Now, the rocket is off track for about 98% of the time, right? Because the correction system can't work unless it goes off track. And sometimes in business, when people are not wanting to be vulnerable, when they're not willing to make mistakes because they don't want to be seen, like they don't know what they're doing is they're actually stalling their ability to grow. And it is hard, right? Because being vulnerable is part of growth. making mistakes is part of growth. And often when I run workshops, I ask people about failure. Is it good or bad? And the answer that comes back mostly is failure is good as long as you learn from it. And everyone goes, right, so failure is good as long as you learn from it. Who loves failing? And no one puts their hand up. And it's interesting. You go, well, it's good because you told me it's good because if you learn from it, but now you're telling me you don't want to do it. So how do we deal with this, right? And part of it is judgment. Part of it is self-image. And part of it is, well, if you're going to own a business and you're an adult, you should know what you're doing, right? Well, sort of. Right? But then you look at all the stories of the most successful people on the planet, and even Elon Musk just recently had that car with the bulletproof windows. I don't know if you saw that article. And you got these people to throw the ball bearings and smash, and everyone's going, "Oh my God, poor guy!" And he's just laughing. He's going, "Well, it doesn't always work, right? It doesn't have to, right? The whole demonstration was hopefully going to work, but it failed." And he's okay about it, right? And everyone's looking at him going, "That poor guy." Not really. He's the richest guy on the planet.
My wife, I give her feedback, and I say to her, I say, "Wife, you know, we're NLP trained, and in NLP we say there's no failure, there's only feedback. But when I give my wife feedback, she takes it as failure. So I say, wife, there's no feedback, there's only failure." And she goes, "Ah." You know, when I was in aviation, I love that rocket metaphor. And I was in the cockpit for takeoff, and we're in these big 777-300 ULR aircrafts. And you can fly about 17 hours max in these aircraft. So we could fly from Dubai all the way over to the west coast of America. Yeah. And the captain looked at me one day and he said, "Daniel," he said, "do you know what would happen if this aircraft was 1 degree off course every hour?" And I said, "Oh, like 16 degrees, is that the answer?" And he said, "No." And I got a lecture from the captain. I said, "Well, you're the expert, you tell me." He said, "Daniel, if this aircraft is 1 degree off course every hour for the next 16 hours and we're traveling at 1,000 kilometers an hour," he said, "one of three things is going to happen." He says, "We could overshoot the runway." And I'd say, "And what does that mean?" He said, "We'll land in the Pacific Ocean and we'll crash and we'll die." And I went, "Oh. 1 degree." And he said, "You know what would happen if this happened?" And I said, "No." He said, "Well, we'd end up in Russian airspace and we'd get shot down and we'd all die." And he said, "Well, you know, if we were at 1 degree off this one," I said, "what would happen?" He'd say, "We'd crash into the desert and we'd all die." And I was shocked because I think to myself in my personal life, how many times have I been 1 degree off course year after year? And like your analogy here, it's a Xerox copy year after year. 1 degree off course. After a whole year, I come back around. Bloody hell, I've just gone around a full circle and I've come back to the beginning. Yes. But it's not the beginning of something new. No. It's just the repeat of something old. Yeah. And it leads, you know, that frustration and overwhelm. Yeah. But I know you talk about burnout a lot. So if we keep repeating this mistake and we say on one hand, failure's great, but we don't want to accept the learnings and the risks that go with it, how does that connect to burnout? And what does that look like? Because I think there's a lot of people who are burned out, but it's very hard to self-diagnose. How could they identify it?
Well, it's an interesting thing, right? Because when people are burnt out, they don't know they're burnt out. Their performance drops, but they don't see it, and they blame everything else around them. Okay, so they go, "It's the market, it's the industry, it's everything else except for me, because I'm the same person," right? And you go, no, but you're burnt out. You go, "What do you mean I'm burnt out?" You've been working really hard. You've been burning the candle at both ends. You're not balanced. You're not doing exercise. You're not eating properly. And you're trying to work harder to make up for the lack of performance. And it becomes like a downward spiral. And it's really hard to pick up because there's an old saying I use often, which is a fish can't see water, right? And so here we are trying to assess our own situation in our business, and we can't really tell. Right? You do need an outside person. This is where the coaching sort of world really emanated from, is that a lot of people who perform in sport or people who perform in business, they recognize I need a second pair of eyes to see what's going on here. Because if you could self-monitor your own burnout, then you would adjust. But sometimes the momentum is so strong, right, in our business. You know, you've got to go to work every day. You've got to answer the phone. You've got to respond to these emails. You've got to. But it's not moving you forward. So what's the answer? Go harder. And the answer sometimes is stop, right? Stop and reassess and work out, is what I'm doing still valid? So burnout occurs when people don't listen to the signals. And I think they just keep going and keep going and keep going. And the problem is 1 year turns into 5, turns into 20. And you'll appreciate this. Anyone who's been in business knows that the clock speeds up, right? And time goes faster, and sometimes we don't know where the time goes. And the reality is we're just doing the same thing over and over and over and over again. So sometimes we just need to stop and reassess and make sure that it's not burnout that's sort of kicking in.
That hamster wheel. I was down at the local night market down where I live, and they sell exotic animals, and you can even get a snake and eat the snake if you're really into eating the snake, which I don't want to eat the snake. No. So one day they had they were selling those little hamsters. And I was watching this hamster run on the wheel. I'd never seen it before. I'd seen a little mouse, but I'd never seen a hamster do it. And I said to my wife, I said, "You got to come over here and look at this." She said, "What?" And I said, "This hamster on the wheel running around." She said, "Why would I want to look at that?" And I said, "Because it looks like me and my business." I'm just running faster and faster and faster. Yeah. And I watched it. And the funniest thing happened, and I got this picture burned in my memory. The hamster tried to stop running on the wheel, and it stopped, and it's dug its little hamster hands into the wheel, and then it held on, and the wheel kept going, and the hamster's going upside down, upside down, upside down, and then the hamster let go, and it flew up outside of the wheel. It flew about half a foot up in the air and landed back in its pen on its back, and it had its little legs up in the air, and it knocked itself out. And I was pissing myself laughing. And my wife's going, "Why are you laughing at that hamster?" I said, "Because that's me.
That's me.
That's me. I'm running on the same wheel. I ain't going anywhere. I'm absolutely exhausted. I'm holding on for dear life." Yeah. And then the momentum just throws me off, and it's knocked me out. Yeah. And I've got to say, it's happened to me. And, it's that ignorance, isn't it? We just don't know what we don't know. We can't see the back of our head. My daughter, she's 9.5. She comes into the shower the other night. She goes, "Oh, Dad, you look like a rat." I'm like, "What do you mean?" She goes, "You got hair on your back." And I said, "Baby, when you get to 41, your hair gets lazy. It stops growing up here. Instead of growing up, it grows down."
Yeah. It probably does. And a few other things grow down as well, don't they?
Yeah. It's like those nose hairs, isn't it?
So, it's interesting you say that, because, I do feel that people go into business with all the right intention, right? And our vision is to reinvigorate the business stream, because I think people go in with the right idea, but then the world slaps them around, and it's a bit like a 4-year-old taking a Great Dane for a walk, right? The question is, who's walking who? And the business takes off in its own direction, and you hang on for dear life, and you go, "What am I doing here? I don't know, but the business is going this direction." And it's nowhere near where you anticipated you wanted to be. And this is why I ask people, if they do one thing before they start their business, is to write the answer to the question, what am I building, and what will it look like when it's finished? Am I going to sell it? Am I going to keep it? But the one answer I don't want to see there is that I'll be really busy, right? Because that's the treadmill.
So what are those 3 things? There's structure, there's education and accountability. Why is this so important at the start rather than at the end? And I think we live in a day and age where we want the quick fix. We want the pill. We want to get rid of something. And so it's like, cure me rather than preventing it. So how does structured planning, business education and accountability come into moving away from being self-employed to actually having a business?
Yep. So once we realize that there is a potential of being on a treadmill, and we decide we're going to build something here. So we have a plan, and we decide we're going to build this beautiful business, and it's going to be this size, and it's going to be under management, and we define that. And we go, great, but we don't know how to do that, because usually we go into business because we've got the skill of that business. Okay, so if we're a plumber, we run a plumbing business. If we're if we're a salesperson, we do sales. And so we go into our profession, which means probably the worst thing ever is that you're the best at the job of the business, and therefore you'll do it. So what then happens is, once you decide you want to build this bigger thing, probably and most likely you do not have the skills to build it. Okay, so then education kicks in, because I'm a big believer you get paid exactly what you're worth. Right? You get paid exactly what you're worth. And if you want to become more valuable, if you want to get paid more, you become more valuable. So we go to learning. Now, the problem with learning is it's easier to sit there and learn passively. So I can read a great book, or I can go to a seminar and get all excited. But if I do not apply that knowledge, if I don't apply it into a working business or into a working model, The knowledge just goes in one ear and out the other. It gets lost. And I meet so many people that are like book geniuses, right? They're book entrepreneurs. They've read every book under the sun. They know all the strategies. They can recite them to you and they can quote them to you, and it's lovely. But until that knowledge gets turned into application, and this sounds weird, but one of my favorite business philosophers is Bruce Lee. And Bruce Lee has a quote that I have on my wall, and it says, "To know and not apply is not to know." Right? And so the idea here is that we read or we learn or we watch, and then we take that knowledge and we apply it in our world. And when we apply it in our world, a different thing happens because we look for change. And if that change scares us, we will self-limit. We will self-limit. And I watch so many people go, "I tried that, it failed." I go, "What did you do about it?" "I never did it again." So you didn't learn anything except that it didn't work, right? So we need to apply, look for change, apply again with a little bit of difference, and we keep applying, okay? And the philosophy of you can't steer a parked car applies to business. I can't tell you to turn left or right at the end of the street unless you're moving and unless you know what you're building. So the goal, the knowledge, and the application. So when we talk about accountability, which is one of the cornerstones of coaching, accountability just means getting people to do what they believe they should do and say they will do, because they will do everything to avoid it. Because if I do it and it fails, I'm a failure, right? I don't want to be seen as a failure, so I'd rather not try, and therefore I won't grow. So being vulnerable, willing to make mistakes, learning from those mistakes and reapplying is where the knowledge and the accountability tie together. And that's what causes breakthroughs. And this is your world, right?
So true. And I think, just tapping onto that, there's a lot of fear involved, and you've got to face these fears. By moving away from the fear, it only makes it bigger. I was working with a consultant the other day, and we're working on my webinars. And I said to him, I've been doing webinars for 10 years and I still don't know what I'm doing because it's changing so much. And we started to pull apart my webinar, and with his help, I can now see my shortfalls. I can see new ways on how to do it better. Was it uncomfortable? Yes. Did I have to let my ego go? Yes. Did I have to challenge all those bullshit stories? Yes. And I said to him, I said to my consultant, I said, I just need a breath of fresh air for a moment, because you're giving me all this new information and I'm loving it, but now I'm trying to scratch out and erase 10 years of bad habits that I have perfected over 10 years.
Yeah.
And I went away and I was totally exhausted from the session. And it was challenging because I had to look at myself in the mirror. I had to accept that what I did in the past did get results, but it no longer works.
Yeah.
And now I've got to get out of all those bad habits. And it's not just as simple as, saying, hey, here's a new habit. You've got to get rid of the old habit. And it's so easy to slip back into those bad habits.
Yes.
And it's uncomfortable, but as fathers, we know with our children. My daughter, 9.5, she walked out to me the other day and she's holding a leg. She goes, Dad, my leg's hurting. And I said, what's wrong? She said, I'm growing. I said, it's growing pains. And she said, yeah. And I said, do you want me to take the pain away? She said, then what will happen? And I said, you're going to stay the same height for the rest of your life. And she went, no, I want to be tall. And I said, good, well, enjoy the pain. And the growing pains are all part of that growth.
Yeah.
And I think you can get through that.
You remind me of a story, right? I learned to sail, and I was in this sailing class with this this captain on this boat. And when you sail a ship, I don't know if you know, it heels, right? So the wind blows a sail and the thing goes over the side, unless you're on a catamaran. And when you're sitting there, you're sitting quite angled, 45 degrees. And he says, when we go to turn, so when we go to tack or jibe, you need to get uncomfortable. I said, why is that? He goes, because if you just sit there and the boat flips from 45 degrees that way to 45 degrees that way, you will get flipped off the boat. So you need to get ready for the turn by getting out of your seat and getting ready and anticipating the tipping over the other way. And it was quite interesting because here we are when we're cruising along in life, when we're cruising along in our business and things are going well, we get comfortable. And if anything hits us, like COVID, like any sort of incident, you've got to get uncomfortable or you'll get flipped out of the boat. Now, the same happens in business. So people who go into business have to be comfortable with change. They have to be adaptable. And here you've just given me a great story of someone who's been doing something the same way for 10 years, and it's actually worked. But there's a point in time when the yield does not equal the effort. And somehow or other, you have to make the decision to break what used to work, and to get uncomfortable and say, right, I need someone from outside, show me all this, tell me what I'm doing wrong. And part of you is sitting there going, you're telling me that everything I've done in the past is wrong, but it wasn't wrong then. It's now not effective anymore. So there's no wrong or right? I prefer things that work and don't work, right? Because it relates to the outcome. And that's why we call our business outcomes, because it's all about the result, right? It's not about whether you're right and whether I'm right. It's all about what's working for you right now. And if it's not working anymore, it doesn't mean it was right or wrong. It just means it's not working anymore. Let's find something that works.
I love it. The outcomes. And I think a lot of people get confused. I've been confused myself when I started my business. I was doing all the inputs. But in business, you don't get paid for the inputs. If you're on a salary, you might get paid for the inputs, but a business gets paid for output. And I've been there, being busy, doing all the things that didn't get results, doing all those things that were fun and easy, tension relieving activities. And a lot of people that I see as well, they go, Daniel, I'm working 14 or 16 hours a day. Yeah. And you say, well, tell me about the results you're getting. Nothing. Well, 12 to 16 hours was all wasted time. And it is about the outcome, so much about the outcome. So people who are moving into business and they want to avoid mistakes, and I think, what we say today is you can save decades of time in a matter of days learning from the experts. And business is also learning about the mistakes of others so you don't have to make the same mistake over and over again. It's like the wheel. The wheel works. Yeah. The wheel works. And after you've mastered the wheel, then go and chrome plate it or make it a little bit bigger, but learn from others. So for people to learn about structured planning, business education, accountability, where's the best place to find you, David?
Really easy. Our website is outcomes.business. Outcomes.business. If you jump on there, there's a couple of resource buttons at the top. There's one called Tools. There's a few things in there. When we talk about what your business will look like when it's finished, we have a tool called the 5-year vision. You can download it from there. We've got a few other tools on there as well. So people can just grab those free tools and get started on the journey. I do believe that for most people, if you're either thinking of going in business or you're in business and you're flatlining, there's a pretty good chance that you've lost your way. And it's either going to be you're on the treadmill and you don't know why, or you're not really clear on where you're going anymore and you're just trying to make ends meet. So getting that vision's right, all the tools are available on there. If they want to reach out, they can reach out to me from there as well.
Do it. Ladies and gentlemen, jump onto outcomes.business. David's got a great website. He's got a great YouTube page. Well, I've been binge watching his videos and I've learned from the master before he's on here today, and I've learned again. So David, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your insights and years of knowledge. And ladies and gentlemen, all you've got to do is to take one idea away from this, and one idea is enough to change your life. And there's plenty of good ones there from David today. David, thank you so much for your time, and we'll see you soon.
It's been an honor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, my friend. Ciao for now. Ladies and gentlemen, we will see you soon. Have a wonderful day.